term global village that Marshall McLuhan coined and popularized in his visionary books, The Gutenberg Galaxy, 1962, and Understanding Media, 1964, has now become a reality for all of us. This is a product of the proliferation of telecommunication and information technologies and society's need to interact globally and better understand the global system. In a new and challenging world of global human networking and interdependence, the role of communication becomes vital, and the most precious resource to be acquired is global knowledge. That is, knowledge about the new realities of the world system and its complex dynamics and risks. This has generated the concept of global intelligence at the individual, organizational, and community levels, which is now critical to our decision-making and performance. With global knowledge and intelligence comes global responsibility amid the great diversity and contrasting realities of our world community. The impact of the internet and new media in general of connecting us in real time across continents and time zones with desk and room teleconferencing capabilities now forces us to become more involved with one another economically, socially, and politically. This has increased human awareness of responsibility, but also has opened new avenues for antisocial behaviors to expand and proliferate globally. Terrorism, drug and human trafficking, kidnapping, violence, and wars are all elements of a new global reality, full of opportunities and progress, but also home to growing crises and disasters that can only be managed effectively with a better understanding of their global context and more effective communication. One measure of the intelligence of an organization or institution is the degree to which it is prepared when disaster strikes. Cities, universities, businesses, and government agencies need to plan and prepare for disasters, respond actively during a crisis, and have the resilience and resources to heal and rebuild after a crisis. Today, as in the past, disasters will inevitably strike. Though we don't know when or where disasters will occur, we do know that they can occur in any country at any time. And we can anticipate that for several reasons, the incidence of large disasters is increasing. The increase in population alone means that people are more likely to be involved in disasters when they occur. The countries of the Pacific Basin are very vulnerable to earthquakes with a destructive force of thousands of atomic bombs. Many of you who live in North, Central, and South America, as well as the Pacific, Asia, and the islands of the Pacific, live in the Ring of Fire, the most geologically active region of the world. Predictably, large earthquakes and large tsunamis will strike this region. The hurricane, the typhoon, and their smaller but even more violent cousin, the tornado, can strike in many parts of the world. Likewise, floods are common threats to many of the world's people. Worse violent weather and enormous storms are increasingly likely as our climate changes and our planet warms. Much of this change is not a natural phenomenon, but is fueled by the emission of carbon and other greenhouse gases from increased human activity and industrialization. We just experienced in the period 2000 to 2010 an unprecedented decade of large storms. and the next decade is likely to be even stormier. Unfortunately, in the past several decades, the world has experienced increased terrorism. From Indonesia to Iraq, from Palestine to Pakistan, from the United States to the United Kingdom, from Colombia to Kenya, from Spain to Somalia, terrorists have inflicted a heavy toll in human fatalities and fear. Not all terrorism can be prevented, but preparation for a resilient response can occur everywhere in the world. All disasters, whether the work of nature or the work of humans, have much in common. They result in death, injury, suffering, and fear. They require a swift local response with additional help from afar. In every disaster, rapid, multifaceted, high-quality, networked communication is essential. Moreover, every disaster is unfortunately a massive communication problem. Disasters disconnect people and agencies and create almost intractable communication failures. During a crisis, every segment of the public, residents, visitors, first responders, public employees, corporate heads, and the news media need competent communication. In writing our book entitled The Handbook of Risk and Crisis Communication, Dr. Brian Spitzberg and I documented the centrality of communication in a disaster, why it often fails, and discussed some of the myths and maxims of risk and crisis communication. In this module, I will explore characteristics of disasters, how we should approach them, the inevitable communication problems that occur during such crisis, and what we need to do in each case to optimize response and mitigate them. Let's first talk about disaster characteristics. Every disaster is unique to some degree, but certain characteristics are shared across most types of crises and disasters. While at San Diego State University, Dr. Brian Spitzberg and I reviewed more than 250 published articles on disasters and discovered the following. All disasters are more similar than different. The research is striking that disasters, regardless of their origin, whether natural, technological, or terrorist, share far more similarities than differences. Disasters occur in a given geographic region, are usually sudden or relatively sudden, are violent and deadly, and require first responders. All disasters are local in character. Whether national or international system may be provided days or weeks or even months later, nearly all disaster incidents are profoundly local, cover a distinct area, and are more likely to be initially covered by local media. Similarly, it is local governments that are the first responders, take responsibility for communication, and provide disaster management. Local media, due to the enormous consequences to a locale, generally suspend normal programming and shift to crisis coverage during the emergency. Research also suggests that local media are more accurate and useful than network and national media in reporting on crises. The local media know the area, the people involved, and best how to assist the local populace in responding to the disaster. Panic is not common in response to disasters. Studies of numerous and various types of disasters suggests that the public does not typically panic, usually behave logically from their own perspective, and respond well to rational directions from government agencies, corporate headquarters, or the media. Despite the widespread stereotype that people behave irrationally during disasters, the vast majority of people behave rationally given the information that is provided to them. Thus, agencies and organizations should provide the public with rapid and accurate information that will optimize their decision-making. Research suggests that the public can be trusted with far more information than most decision makers think it can handle. Incompetent responses to disasters are common and costly. Each decade, millions of people die in disasters, and tens of billions of dollars are lost. Today, due to population increases, crowding, and the interconnection of people across the world, human disasters are ever more common. As climate change promotes more natural disasters, and as population growth makes each disaster more likely to hit populated areas, the human and economic costs of disasters are rising dramatically. Sadly, better preparation and more effective response could have saved thousands of lives and reduced the economic cost of recovery. Information is partial and inaccurate in disaster situations. Disasters frequently disrupt communication media, and disasters ranging from the Fukushima earthquake in Japan to the New York 9/11 attacks on the United States, mobile phones were useless as cell sites were destroyed or disabled, and surviving sites had their capacity exceeded. Internet servers often crash during disasters when they are overloaded. Power outages may prevent all types of electronic communication, and local media sources could be blacked out. Incoming information may be spotty, and accurate information from ground zero might be difficult to obtain. Unfortunately, communication is a disaster imperative. Crisis managers need information quickly. Any agency or organization must obtain information rapidly, confirm it, and disseminate it to the public along with behavioral instructions that promote survival and minimize suffering. Poor communication can create chaos and additional loss of life. Now let's discuss communication problems during disasters. Most disasters have common communication issues. First, people are inclined to deny or rationalize away their actual risk. Disasters and death are uncomfortable issues to contemplate. Most people prefer not to think about that experience and are in denial about the possibility of ever experiencing a disaster. Every institution, including families, schools, businesses, and government agencies, need a plan that can quickly be implemented when disaster strikes. The fortunate presence of experienced medical and police personnel at the finish line of the Boston Marathon bombing in April of 2013 dramatically reduced deaths and saved lives. Second, many complex factors determine how people will behave during a disaster, reducing the predictability of individual people. The location of family members, disbelief about the disaster's severity, the desire to protect their home and personal effects, interpersonal influences of friends and neighbors, Curiosity and limited information may contribute to unpredictable and sometimes dangerous responses. It is not uncommon for individuals to try to observe floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, or nuclear disasters firsthand. People will put themselves at great risk to find family members or even a pet. It is important to tell people what not to do so they do not put themselves at greater risk. Third, many people are disinclined to follow authority or fail to trust the directions that agencies provide. Distrust of government agencies, corporations, or the media may prompt people to challenge and even violate instructions. People often feel that agencies disrespect them, provide overly general information, and may not be sensitive to their racial or cultural groups. Research suggests that skepticism is widespread across many disasters. People do not heed warnings, particularly if they have been falsely warned before, and often have a general distrust of many institutions. The selection of trustworthy communication sources is a crisis imperative. Fourth, optimism often prevails during a disaster. It can't happen here, or what are my chances, are often communicated interpersonally or to oneself. Optimism is a primary barrier to action. How many times have you failed to heed a fire alarm because you thought it was just a drill? This also prevails in the general public. People may not believe that a disaster will affect them because of the relative infrequency of disasters in a given locale. People find the prospect of such an event actually occurring as being incredible. People often look for normalcy to dismiss warnings, and many people truly believe it could not happen to them. Finally, given the inadequacy of disasters, the public cost-benefit analysis tends to favor inaction, since actions like evacuations and sheltering is costly. Likewise, in most organizations, an optimistic bias prevails in regard to both natural disasters and terrorism. It is important for organizations to be trained to take any impending crisis seriously. Fifth, there is always biased risk assessment. People are notoriously inaccurate at assessing risk. Many disasters have vague or intangible risks, so people fail to assess any great probability of harms to themselves. Sixth, there is always poor information reception. Individuals fail to properly process information about a disaster. People in general are notoriously poor listeners. Seventh, undermining messages are always produced. Informal, personal, or social communication sometimes undermine, misinterpret, or deflect formal or official communication messages. Eighth, delays of communication tend to occur. Warning messages may arrive at the at-risk population too slowly or not at all. Ninth, there is usually media misuse. Crisis messages may be transmitted through the wrong media for the intended population in need. 10th, confusion always occurs. Incoming crisis messages may be contradictory or confusing to people. The necessity of a crisis communications center with accurate, consistent, clear, and rapid communication cannot be overemphasized. Likewise, messages should be unambiguously worded in language that the target audience can understand. Finally, the affected population has many individual differences. There is no actual single monolithic public, but instead multiple constituencies that differ in innumerable ways. In conclusion, we all need to adopt a new mentality of visualizing and understanding risks and threats in our environments, fueled by the new global realities of demographic explosion, terrorism, and environmental degradation. Prevention is not always possible, but managing effectively and mitigating impacts are. The key is communication. In another module, I will discuss how to communicate competently before, during, and after a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Let's now go to the second module of this program.